We already have some colleagues joining us. Good morning. You guys are the most enthusiastic. Hello. Hello, Vitautas.
Hello.
Hey, good morning. I see Michal Siminuc. Good morning.
Oh, hello. Good morning.
Hello. Fine. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hey. Okay, so we'll give this just a couple of minutes. It's still 28 minutes past. So we'll wait just 2 minutes and we'll see if some of the others will join us. We have a really interesting topic today. Well, I think all of these topics are interesting, but this is an especially useful one. We're continuing the topic of pitching, and regarding pitching, we're going to be looking at pricing. You know, how do you price the offer that you make in a pitch? Which is kind of interesting because, to be honest, guys, I'll tell you a secret. Everybody's basically doing it wrong. There's lots and lots of very common mistakes which are being made when it comes to legal services pricing or changing prices. In fact, I've written 2 textbooks about this. One of them is called Upselling and Raising Prices. How do you get more money from your clients, and how do you raise your rates and prices? And then another book which I wrote, and these are both training topics I cover, is called basically Legal Services Pricing. Because I get the feeling, especially from lots of small to medium-sized law firms, people don't actually really know how to do pricing for the legal products. And what they're doing is they're just copying their friends and colleagues from other practices. So generally, there is significant room for improvement when it comes to talking about legal services pricing. And then I made the mistaken assumption that surely the big international law firms, these large consultancies, they must know what they're doing about pricing, mustn't they? Quite often they don't. You know, very often they're also making some silly mistakes. So that's the topic which we're going to be looking today. We're continuing the topic of pitching, which we started last week. And pitching is when you make a proposition. You have a legal product or a legal solution, and you're going to propose it to your current or your ex or a potentially new client. So that's what pitching is. And in the previous session, I don't know if you managed to see the recording. In the previous session, I did a general introduction to pitching, and we saw that as lawyers, there are basically 2 different types of pitching that we can do. We can do reactive pitching, which means we're asked to make a proposal. Somebody sends us an RFP, a request for a proposal, and then we formulate usually a PowerPoint presentation, and we respond to them, and hopefully we win. So that's solicited pitching. And a lot of law firms are doing this. This is quite common. And then the other type of pitching, which I was more recommending, is unsolicited pitching, spontaneous pitching. And this is when, as a lawyer or a partner or a legal practice, you come up with a value proposition. You have something interesting to offer, and at your initiative, you propose that again to a current or an ex or a new client. And of course, what I've noticed working with a few hundred law firms is most of them are not doing unsolicited pitching. Most of them do not propose anything proactively to their clients. And of the ones that do propose something to their clients, they tend to only be market driven. So they wait until something changes in the legislation in their jurisdiction. Let's say there's some development about the ultimate beneficiary owner in companies, and then only on the basis of legislative changes, then they propose to the current clients, potentially ex-clients, about some kind of legal action to take. So this is very primitive. This is extremely primitive. And if you are only following market-driven pitching, it means you don't really have a strategy. You're just following what's happening on the market. So maybe this year it's going to be something in corporate, next year it's something in tax, next year it's some kind of legal changes which actually do not have real benefit or impact from a business perspective. But because we're lawyers and because we're market-driven, we're going to propose this to our clients anyway. And a lot of these market-driven changes don't necessarily generate a ton of money either. You know, I've seen so many law firms. I'm remembering, no, I shouldn't be too specific. I shouldn't be too specific when I'm going to criticize companies. But I remember, I've seen this quite a few times. There's some relatively insignificant change to legislation. So the law firm puts together a ton of webinars and broadcasts about it, and then they pitch it to their clients and they get some work. But this is really very commodity work, and it's not a money spinner. So I'm not impressed with that. My big recommendation from the previous session when it comes to pitching is it's up to you if you want to play the game of RFPs and, you know, respond to requests for proposals. Personally, unless you're sure that you really have a good competitive advantage and that there's a nice chance of you winning, personally, I really wouldn't recommend doing it. I'm very unconvinced about requests for proposals, because I think you should be taking matters into your own hands and be doing proactive pitching, not being market-driven, because then all of your competitors are doing the same thing. Your work becomes commodity, there's price dumping, but you should be doing spontaneous premium pitching. You come up with an idea, you propose it. So that's a basic summary from the previous session. And if you haven't seen it, I already shared with you the link because we had a problem with the live stream. Last Thursday, I was in Athens, and it turns out that the internet connection was pretty dreadful. So we missed that, and I recorded it. Today, I'm here in wonderful Estonia. They're very technologically progressive, and we have high-speed internet. So I think today, fingers crossed, we should be without connection issues. So as usual, we know what is the early morning show. Every Thursday morning, 8:30 to 9:30 Central European time, I talk about my stuff, my passion about legal business development for half an hour, and then I try and get some interactivity. You can ask questions, you can engage, we can discuss this. So again, guys, please don't be shy. While this license isn't very good, that it doesn't allow me to speak to everybody simultaneously, you do have the questions and answer function. So you can throw in a question or a comment at any time, and I promise to answer those. Okay, so last time we did an introduction to pitching, and we examined basically the two different types of pitching, solicited pitching and unsolicited pitching. I told you that, and I think you're not going to be surprised, when it comes to pitching, regardless of whether it's solicited via an RFP or if it's unsolicited, a very critical concept in legal services pitching is the pricing section. And this is why I really hate RFPs. This is why I don't like requests for proposals, because you can put a ton of time into responding to an RFP. You can make a 50-slide PowerPoint deck if you want. You can include your testimonials and your biographies and your case studies, all the rest of it. And in the end, quite often the client will simply skip all of that stuff, look at the pricing page and choose whoever is cheapest. And like I've mentioned before, you cannot compete on price. There will always be somebody cheaper. Even worse, there's a kind of dilemma, because I'm sure you're good guys. I'm sure you're good lawyers, you're ethical, you have nice legal practices, but maybe not all of your competitors are. And without getting too paranoid, we could suspect that it's theoretically possible that when a client sends out an RFP to a number of law firms, maybe somebody is going to underpitch to make a lower initial offer, knowing that it's not going to cost that much money, and then inflate it over time once the client is already engaged and can't escape. So you have a double disadvantage. Because you're ethical and you're not going to do that kind of thing, it puts you at a disadvantage if other people are trying to cheat. And even if you're competing with nice ethical law firms, it's unlikely that you're going to be the cheapest, because the very fact that you're on this call shows that you're trying to improve yourself, improve your practice. You're trying to be cutting edge, which means you can't possibly be the cheapest. So the topic of pricing is extremely important. And today's presentation, I'm going to divide it basically into two halves, like the last one. The first 8 concepts, which you can see at the top of the screen up there, these are about some interesting points and best practices. So I'm just being opinionated based on what I've seen from different law firms, which I thought was kind of cool, some nice ideas. And recommendations, I'll tell you. And then the second half of the presentation, this is the last 8. These are 8 common mistakes that law firms and lawyers make in legal services pricing, and specifically in pitching. So I think you're going to recognize some of these mistakes, because I can whisper to you, I expect you're making quite a few of them. And then by being aware of these different mistakes, we can hopefully rectify them and change them. And again, choose your battles wisely. If you're in a small to medium-sized law firm, I can accept, and I would expect you can adopt some of the best pricing policies within a few weeks, within this quarter if you wanted to. If you're coming from a large international legal practice, you might not be in a position of authority to change anything about pricing. You know, even if you're a partner, if there's hundreds of other partners, thousands of other partners, it is what it is. And believe me, guys, the big legal consultancies, these internationals, can do pretty silly things when it comes to pricing. So you can only change what you can change. But let me throw in a quick advertising. Because before we're looking at pitching and pricing, I got a number of questions regarding that previous difficult point when it comes to pitching. The question, what can you offer me? And again, I notice quite often it is very difficult for law firms to come up with spontaneous UVPs, to come up with legal products, which they can then propose to current ex and new clients, which are not being market driven. So I can advertise. I created a sales paper because I was asked to do this. So one law firm engaged me. So I was asked to do this. I created 64 legal products for proactive pitching. This is covering 16 different practice areas. There's 4 spontaneous products for each of them. So like for IP, for tax, dispute resolution, real estate, and so on. This is quite a large paper. And I do that as a 4-hour consultation. So if you don't have legal products, and again, a lot of law firms don't. A lot of law firms have nothing to offer in terms of proactive value proposition, then drop me an email, and that's something that we can do together. And also, guys, notice what I'm doing here. I got a request from one law firm, and they're saying to me, "Hey, James, this is really hard. Can we just pay you and you tell us how to do it?" And I said, "Cool." So I created it. And now what I'm doing is called recycling. I have a product and I can repitch it. So you can do the same kind of thing. This would be one way that you could think about proactive pitching. If you've done a good piece of legal work, could you repackage that? Could you propose it to other clients? You know, I think that's totally ethical. And the nice thing is, if you manage to do this several times, you will build up expertise and know-how in that specific legal area, and you will become the expert on the area. So the more you recycle, the more you pitch, the stronger you will become as a lawyer, and the quicker you will do it. And the number of hours that you would need to invest in research and analysis, even drafting, would drop. So your profitability would increase. So again, once you find a legal product that actually works for proactive pitching, then, you know, scale it, do it further. Okay, so yeah, and if you're interested in that paper, 64 legal products for proactive pitching, just drop me an email. Now, guys, let's take a step back. I understand, as lawyers, we don't like to record billable hours. And I see so many managing partners get very frustrated and very upset with the lawyers because the lawyers are forgetting to do the billable hours, to update the system. And in some of the firms, they have perhaps a week to update the system. In some of the firms, people do it over the course of a month, which is really catastrophic. Before we begin to look at pricing and pitching for clients, you really need to make sure that your recording billable hours in your legal practice is good. The best practice is daily recording of billable hours. If I was a managing partner, I would speak to my IT guy and I would have the system cut off, let's say at 9 in the evening, that if hours are not recorded for that day, they cannot be recorded and they are lost. So this is a very strict approach, because what I noticed when I was working at, this wasn't at Deloitte, this was when I was working at another large international legal consultancy, that you can actually measure the percentage of revenues which are lost by the infrequency of recording. So if you're recording just at the end of the month, you could be losing 5 to 10% of your billable hours. People forget, people just don't record them. If you're recording on a weekly basis, it can be between 3 to 5%. So the best thing that you can do is to record billable hours every day. Yes, I know people don't like to do it. And yes, people are going to make excuses and justifications, and don't accept that. Billable hours need to be recorded on a daily basis. This is a very simple best practice that you need to enforce. And by doing that, you will increase your revenues quite simply. And this is also doubly important because one thing that we don't want to happen is to give unpleasant surprises to clients. So we need to have clear communication with clients about how close are we getting to a fee cap? How big are these fees becoming? If you have an online ERM system or a data room, or even if you just sent an email on a weekly basis from finance and accounting to update the client about the small increases in the billable hours, then that's going to avoid unpleasant surprises. And you're less likely to get into a pricing or a payment conflict with your client. A lot of law firms don't do this. A lot of law firms are not terribly organized when it comes to recording the billable hours. They put something together and eventually they send the invoice to the client, and the client is horrified because this comes as a big shock to them. They didn't realize it's going to cost so much money. So the client then demands a retroactive discount. We're going to pay less. And then you have to choose, are you going to sue your client, which would have huge reputational damage, or are you going to absorb this kind of retroactive discount? And most law firms absorb the retroactive discount. Prevent this happening. Record billable hours on a daily basis. That's a best practice. Next, very few law firms have a pricing committee. So we've talked about this before. The common situation that I see with law firms is that they have, let's say, billable hourly rates. Maybe it differs for partner, senior associate, yeah. So it can depend on the experience. And the problem is they haven't raised these rates for a few years. And of course, 100 euros in 2023 has less purchasing power than 100 euros before the pandemic back in 2019. So you need to do at least an annual review of pricing, and you need to be increasing your prices at least on an annual basis. If you were smart, you would have an automatic increase clause in your contract, so you don't have to communicate this delicate matter each time to your clients. But another thing that you could have, and most law firms don't have it, is a pricing committee. It is actually quite difficult to decide what would be an acceptable pricing policy. If we're going to look at the new hourly rates, what should they be? If you leave this to the decision of one person, a managing partner, they are more likely to make a mistake here. If you feel pessimistic and the law firm is entering a time of famine, you're going to feel price pressure, and you're going to not make such a large price increase, or maybe not increase prices at all. And then if you're feeling optimistic, if you've just won a few mandates that month and you think the economy is going to boom, then you can be more ambitious in terms of your increase in prices. So this has been proven. I've read a few different papers about it. If you have 3, 4, 5, 6 people on a committee, and they're going to examine what should be our pricing policy for the next year, they're more likely to make an informed decision, less subjective. And on this pricing committee, it shouldn't simply be only partners or lawyers. There's a lot of value in having 1 or 2 perspectives from non-legal people in your company. So yes, it might be the accountant, but it could also be your marketing person, your business development person, and you reach a consensus. So if you don't have a pricing committee, you can then flesh out ideas, discuss together what you think is appropriate, and then reach a conclusion. And that decision from a pricing committee is going to generally be better than from a single individual. Next, there's a strange concept called contextual Coke. So I'll give you an analogy. If you're going to buy a tin of Coca-Cola, theoretically, it shouldn't matter where you buy it. The price should be the same. So you're in your home city. A can of Coca-Cola should cost, I don't know how much it costs, €1, yeah? But that's not the case. People will pay more. Maybe they would pay 2 or 3 euros to buy a can of Coke from, let's say, from a shop in a fancy supermarket, a fancy hotel, than they would pay less, let's say, if you're buying it from a kiosk on the street. The price of even a commodity product like a can of Coca-Cola depends on the context at which it is purchased. So people can pay several times more or less, even for a can of Coke, and the perceived quality of that identical commodity product will also be different. So again, you don't need to, you can see the analogy. When we're talking about something which isn't a commodity product, we're talking about a premium service, we're talking about legal services. The context at which it is being sold or pitched to the client has a very great impact on the perceived value, even for commodity legal work. So it could be a mistake to say, all right, you want to do a piece of commodity legal work. We're going to work with, let's say, we're working with startups. We have a junior associate who's working with the startups, and this junior associate is going to do, an IP review. They're going to look at the startup. They're going to examine the startup in terms of their patents, their trademarks, their copyright. And that's our product, which we're pitching to the startups. And we're telling them, guys, you can get problems and difficulties with financing and investment later if you don't have IP protection sorted now. Or even worse, guys, you can lose all of your IP and all of this hard work which you're developing over the years when you get investment 5 or 6 years down the line, because you haven't structured and anticipated what's going to happen when you reach that wonderful investment. So we have a young lawyer, we have a junior associate, they're proposing this IP review. It would be a mistake to perhaps say, this is a fixed fee, I don't know, €5,000 legal product, and we pitch it. You could actually increase the value, the perceived value, by emphasizing the narrative and the story behind that junior associate. Nobody cares if this junior associate has 3 years of experience, went to such and such a university, and speaks 2 languages. That's a plain vanilla bio. You can get 1 million of these little junior associates and they all look identical. Now, if you got creative with a narrative around that junior associate, you show that they have experience with the startup companies, and you name drop some of the projects they were in, and you throw in some interesting, groovy, cutting edge stuff that this junior associate does beyond IP, such as trademark, patent, and copyright. Maybe they're doing something with, I don't know, NFTs or crypto or blockchain or something cool. Then, you create that narrative, you're changing the context. That isn't just, a can of Coca-Cola from a kiosk on the street. This becomes a can of Coca-Cola, nicely refrigerated from an exclusive boutique. So I think the contextual Coke concept means you should probably better design the narrative around your fee earners. And most of the law firms are doing this in a very plain vanilla way. I can go on your website. I can look, especially at associates. I can look at some resumes of associates, and they look like clones of other associates from your competitors. They don't have the context. So that kind of storytelling and narrative could have a very great impact on perceived value and the possibility for upselling. You're more likely to be able to upsell premium solutions if you change the context. When you look at the pricing, when you put the pricing into your pitch documents, there's a thing called KISS pricing. Keep it simple, silly. And in the little diagram, where am I? Here I am. In the diagram, you can see 4 different ways of presenting a price. The smaller the presented price is, the more likely it is to be accepted. So if you have €1, 499 period 00, that is going to be perceived as being bigger and more expensive than just 1499. In your pitch documents, even the size of the font has an impact. So it would be good if you had, let's say Times New Roman font 20 for the description of the services or the product, Times New font 10 without the currency symbol 1499 for the price itself. You can sometimes see this being done in fancy restaurants. They have very little numbers with no currency because, they understand that that's going to impact the perceived price. It's kind of silly, but it works. And in your pricing documentation, in the pitch itself, if you have given a discount, or if you're gonna give a discount, and I really wish you wouldn't do this, I strongly recommend not doing discounting, but if you do, you could put the old price, let's say 1,000 euros, put a cross over it in red, and you show the new price, 800 euros, and you show where a discount had been applied. Now, if you have done this in an engagement letter or a contract, when people come back to this and the client comes back to it a year later, and again, they want more discount, they say times are tough, because guys, discounts are like drugs. Clients get addicted. They want more and more. You shouldn't be doing discounts. It's going to make it harder for them to negotiate further a discount upon a discount when you can already see the discount reminder. Ideally, you shouldn't be doing discounts at all. But if you're going to do that, then you can put a discount reminder. And then human psychology is very strange. If you're going to raise your rates, there is such a thing as psychological price thresholds. So you've seen this before. You know about this from shopping, that if something costs $9.99, people are going to be more likely to buy it and perceive it as being of a lower price than if it costs 10 euros. So it's kind of silly, but that's how people work. What this means is, if you're going to raise your rates, let's say your hourly rates, and your hourly rate was 195 euros per hour, if you're going to raise it to 205 euros per hour, there's more chance that the client is going to make drama and make a scandal because you crossed the price threshold of 200. This means that in theory, there's nothing to stop you from increasing your rate from 195 to 215. You will be crossing that price threshold anyway. So they're less likely to make a scandal that when you, what I mean to say, how can I say this? If you cross a price threshold, like from 195 to 205, they're unlikely to be happy. You breach the threshold. They're going to make some kind of, there's some kind of drama. So be aware that clients don't think in terms of percentage change. That's not how they see price changes. So your percentage change could actually be higher. If a price threshold is going to be broke, it's going to be broke. And you might want to sometimes, if you're going to be very cautious, you might just stick to, let's say, 195 to 199. So be aware not just of percentage changes. So what I mean to say is it's going to be very silly if you just decide to increase all of your hourly rates by 10%. Some of them you could increase it a little bit more and the client isn't going to be upset because the price threshold is broken anyway. And for others, it might be better to decrease it a little bit so that it doesn't cross a price threshold. That's a very simple analysis to do. You can do that in about 10 or 15 minutes. And again, people compare prices. So if you have the price of different products together and you have something which is super premium and high, then people will anchor their thoughts and compare against it. That's why it's a good idea to have a really super premium product on your pricing list, not because you necessarily expect people to buy it, but so that it desensitizes them to the price of the other products on offer. In a similar way, if you're entering the pricing discussion in a client consultation, a nice strategy to do would be to begin with a war story. And you tell a war story. There was such and such a client. They had a similar case as this. It was really quite complicated and difficult. And it came to 100,000 euros. You've mentioned 100,000 euros. They're anchored onto that. Then you reassure them. Fortunately, however, your legal situation is not quite as complicated. And also based on our good know-how and experience, we see some better ways to do things, which will take less time. So we're expecting that your case probably won't come to more than 50,000 euros. Psychologically, they've already anchored themselves against that horrific number of 100,000. So when you mention that 50,000, they're not going to be quite as upset. If you just mention 50,000 from nowhere, they will start comparing it or anchoring it to some other random things. They had a legal consultation on a totally different project for 10,000, something else was 20,000. Your 50,000 will seem horrifically expensive. So keep in mind anchoring. You can always drop into the conversation, into the war story, some very high prices. And then when you come to their one, mention a lower one. And a nice thing, which I don't see a lot of lawyers doing, is called tiered pricing. You don't need to have a fixed hourly rate or just, and this is a big mistake, a generic blended rate for all of the fee earners in your company. You know, this is very, very silly. This is silly for a great number of reasons. If you're curious, you can email me about it. I'll tell you. So having one unified blended rate is catastrophic. Having the traditional rates by seniority, that has a number of mistakes in it. Tiered pricing has a great number of advantages. So in tiered pricing, you might say the first 20 hours come to 200 euros an hour, the next 20 is to 180, the next 20 is to 150. If you have done effective time tracking with clients, and you know small to medium-sized clients usually go to such and such a level, you can actually get some very nice profitability through changing to tiered pricing, from hierarchical pricing, and especially from blended rate. So before we move to the second part of the presentation about the common mistakes, if I have another call to action, another advertising, I put together a paper. If you're interested in a 20-point pricing plan, which will increase at least by 10% your revenues, this isn't that difficult really, contact me and we can do that. Next, we're going to look at 8 common mistakes in terms of pricing. Next, we're going to look at the 8 common mistakes in pricing. Pricing mistakes lawyers make in pitching. And I'm aware of the time because it's already 10 o'clock. So I want to do this kind of quickly and then get to the Q&A section. And again, guys, while we're talking, don't be shy. You can put comments or questions in the Q&A box. The first mistake that we make in pricing in legal services is what I call the intuitive pricing crystal ball. I get the feeling that a lot of small to medium-sized law firms have no idea what they're doing with pricing. They're not sure where to start, so they begin with benchmarking. They look into a crystal ball and they just guess some kind of number. They get a feel of what's happening on their market, and so they put something which they think is comparative, and then they discount it a little bit. Yeah, so that's the common mistake. Yeah, we think that in our city it's about 200 euros an hour, because that's what I heard from some different people. So we're a new legal practice. Let's start at 150, so we have a price advantage to get more clients, and we'll go further. This is really, really silly. You shouldn't be doing things intuitively. Where is your pricing committee? You're more likely to make a good decision if you have several heads together rather than one. And you should have a much more systematic, objective approach to this. If you really want to compare yourself to the other law firms on the market, have you gained that information? Do you have that data? You can get this information. You can request it. You can find it, and then you can make a more informed pricing decision. So don't just go by intuition. And a lot of partners do this. They get an RFP, client says, how much will it cost to do this piece of work? And they say, oh, I think it'll be, 5,000. And they just send it off. That number will depend on whether they had lunch or if they're hungry, or if they're optimistic or pessimistic, if they're in a good mood or a bad mood. It's very, very, very silly. Do not do intuitive pricing. And you've got to be ethical and transparent with your clients. One time I flew to St. Petersburg, and I was at the airport and I wanted a coffee. So I came to the coffee counter and I said, yeah, I'll have a cappuccino. And she said, would you like a stronger coffee? I said, okay. So she just gave me a double and charged me twice. So yeah, that was kind of smart on her side. She managed to do an upsell. She doubled the revenue, but it also really pissed me off. So when you're speaking to clients, don't give them hidden fees. Don't, I see law firms do this all the time, usually because of bad communication and lack of adequate recording of billable hours. Don't put together this invoice and then send it off to the client and then keep your fingers crossed that they're not going to notice and make a scandal. That's a really, really bad way of doing it. You have to have transparency. If you're going to charge someone for something, let them know in advance. Don't charge them and then send them an invoice afterwards. So don't make this stronger coffee mistake. In your long-term interest, it's better not to be doing that. And with your clients, in terms of the pricing and the invoicing, be careful not to fall into the sunk cost trap. The bigger the debt owed to you, the bigger the sunk cost, the greater risk and exposure you have of default. And sooner or later, some clients do change from accounts receivable into bad debts. Only have debts that you're willing to write off. It's like that example, only lend money that you're willing to never receive back at all. I hear so many stories of law firms, especially smaller legal practices, which get into more and more revenue being owed to them by a client, and then the client is in difficulty, and then they do a retroactive discount, or they just don't get paid. So I would recommend you be very, 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 very strict. Of course, you're not meant to be starting an engagement until you have all of the paperwork signed. You've done your know your client policy, you have the contract back, you've got the invoice, you've got your retainer, for example. If someone isn't willing to pay a retainer, don't bother working with them. You're not selling potatoes at the market, you're a lawyer. You should be a little bit more ambitious in terms of who you're working with. Because on the market, there are D clients. What does this mean? Let's make a list of all of your clients. We'll make a list of your clients by revenue. You will find that probably 20% of your clients pay 80% of your revenue. These are the A clients. That's the Pareto principle. So you have a few very good clients. They pay lots of revenue. You should be inviting them to lunch. You should be cross-selling to them. Whoever pays you the most money now can pay you even more in future. And then we have B clients. They pay us some money. It's a mix of premium and commodity work. We have lots of C clients. They pay us little bits of money, and it's mostly commodity work. And then we have D clients. These are small companies, or God forbid, if you're working with persons, and they are actually loss generators. Most law firms don't actually know how much time they are spending working on client work, because we have invisible discounting. So you have a D client, they're paying some trifling small sum of money to our legal practice. Maybe it's a businessman, it's a person, even worse. They will have very high demands. They'll be calling you all the time. They'll be wanting lots of advice. They'll be wanting lots of things for free. They understand that, of course, you're a free service to benefit society. They don't want to pay. And quite often we're not recording all of the time that it's actually being spent on someone. So we don't record the emails and the calls. A lot of law firms don't even charge for calls, which is very silly. Charge everything. If they breathe, you charge them. People do not appreciate something for free. Stop doing that. So you have these D clients. And if we really saw how much time you were putting into them, and then you discount that to tell your partner, and the partner discounts that to tell the managing partner, and the managing partner discounts that to actually invoice them, you can be having a horrendous amount of time in reality being spent on someone, which means they're unprofitable. D clients are more likely not to pay you. They're more likely to be a nuisance. They're more likely to cause problems. You should fire your D clients. You can have clients who are not even profitable. How do you do this? Of course, when I say fire, everything you do is nice and polite and friendly. Raise your rates. Take a retainer. recommend that decline to one of your friends. For your legal practice, this isn't a good client. They're not a good match. They don't pay enough money and they're very annoying. Recommend it to one of your friends from a smaller legal practice, maybe a sole practitioner. For them, that D client could be an A client. They can get much more attention, more personalized information, and all of those silly questions which they start asking you about as a corporate lawyer, about their car accident and their divorce and all of this other random legal things which are not in your area of expertise, then you give it to someone who actually does that kind of stuff. And as a managing partner, do not make the mistake of helping one of your friends with some crazy legal issues on a personal level just because they're a friend and this is going to build value and equity. No, you're a corporate law firm. Your area of expertise is these wonderful, sophisticated mergers and acquisitions or complex litigation, whatever. Do not start diversifying and diluting your message as a favor. It's very, very, very silly. So the advice here is be careful who you're working with. If you're so busy, and I hear this from partners all the time, I don't have time for business development because I'm so busy. Yeah, really? Are you busy with A clients? Is this premium work? Get rid of your D clients. This is called cutting the tail. I remember I was working with one legal consultancy in London, and they paid a six-figure sum of money in pounds for some pricing and consulting advisory about how to increase profitability. And the advice was cut the tail, get rid of your D clients. You could write that on a postcard. You don't need to pay six figures in pounds to get that idea. And remember, expensive and cheap, these are subjective. You are neither cheap nor expensive. Cheap means the perceived value is low for the price that you charge. Expensive is the opposite. Perceived price is too high for the value you charge. Do not begin to think that you're expensive. You do commodity work and you do premium work. Commodity work can be perceived as expensive if it's a bit above the market rate. Well, unless you're a very junior lawyer, you shouldn't be doing commodity work. If you're a senior lawyer, you should be delegating your commodity work to the juniors and going and chasing the premium work. So you mustn't start believing that you're expensive. And quite often lawyers and partners can do this. They begin to think, wow, we're so expensive. There is some wiggle room. Surely a little 10% discount wouldn't hurt. It'll build relations. It will hurt. It will hurt. Your 10% discount can make a 50% decrease in profitability. Your 10% discount might even change profitability into a loss. So don't start believing that you're expensive. Depends what you're comparing yourself to. Why are you comparing yourself to some small, cheap, silly boutique firms where you have one or two very lowly qualified lawyers in your jurisdiction? Why not be more ambitious? Why not benchmark yourself against some of the leading consultancies in the world that charge €1,000 an hour? They're not smarter than you. You're just as smart. You're just as talented. So why are you positioning yourself against something which is commodity and basic? Don't give clients unpleasant surprises. Small pieces of bad news over time are much better than one big piece of bad news. This comes back to our reporting on the billable hours. It comes back to clear communication. And again, don't make that mistake of the stronger coffee, that you're just going to charge something and hope they don't notice. They will notice, and it could be an unpleasant surprise. And again, my advice about discounts, don't do it. And the most catastrophic thing that you can do with a discount is to give a naked discount. A naked discount says, hey, we want a discount. And you say, okay. So you give them a discount in exchange for nothing. That's a naked discount. If you're going to give a discount, at least get consideration, like under English law, a contract, exchange of value. So a volume discount is more acceptable than a naked discount. We'll charge you for 9 due diligences if you give us 10. Again, I really don't like this idea because it does sound like you're selling potatoes at the market and you're not a commodity product seller. You're selling premium legal services. So if you have to, get something in exchange for a discount. Make a volume discount. Change the time period during which the piece of work has to be given. Get something. If you give a naked discount, it is catastrophic. You undercut yourself. You destroy your brand. They will want more discounts. It doesn't increase perceived value, and it doesn't improve the relationship. The bigger the discount, the shorter the relationship. The bigger the discount, the worse the relationship. The bigger the discount, the more commodity you appear. Pricing is an indicator of quality in legal services. If you want to be perceived as a super duper lawyer, charge €1,000 an hour. You can charge €1,000 an hour, but it means you need to then do things to get clients who are willing to pay that. It is possible. So yeah, I really hate discounts. I think you can notice. And then the last concept for today, then we'll go to the Q&A. I haven't left so much time for this, is a change order. A change order is a document. Most law firms don't have it. In the same way that most law firms don't have a pricing committee, but they should. Most law firms don't have a change order, but they should. A change order, it could be like a one-page PDF document, which means there has been a significant change in the scope of the work that we're going to do. And because of this change, we change the pricing. Yeah. So you can have a single simple document explaining itself at the top. And then in the change order, you show the paragraphs of your initial agreement, which are now changed, and you show the new ones and how that's changed. And this gives you the legitimacy and the credibility to inform the client that you're changing the rates. You can pretend to be good cop. You say, well, dear client, sorry, at our legal practice, we have this change order. This is scope creep. This scope creep has become so much. There's actually a different kind of order. Our big bad managing partner, our board of directors, they insist that when there are these changes, we have to send a change order. That's our company policy. And here's your change order. And then you deal with it. Do not just let scope creep expand and expand and expand. And then after 6 months, you realize you're doing some really weird, different kind of activity with different rates, different expectations than before. So have a change order. If you're interested in, I suppose we could do that. If you're interested in the creation of a change order, then email me. I've got some kind of templates that we could work on together. And then that's the end for today about pricing. So we had the 8 best practices and some cool ideas, and then the 8 common mistakes that you want to avoid. And I did my 2 shameless little parts about advertising. If you want to have that consultation and the article about the 20 pricing policies to increase profitability by at least 10%, we can do it. And if you've got interest in the 64 value propositions products, that's another thing we can do. You can see on the schedule here, these are the different cities I'm going to be in the next couple of months. Latest development was rather nice news for me. I got an order in Shanghai for April. So that means I'll probably build around that. A tour, I'll go to Hong Kong, Bangkok, probably Hanoi. So there'll be a tour there. Again, if you see that I'm going to be in any of your countries, drop me a line. I'm happy to meet with you, to speak with you, to have a coffee. I promise not to sell to you. Today I'm in Tallinn, tomorrow I'm in Helsinki, and then I go back to Prague. All right, I think at that point, let me stop just doing my lecture.